Hey, pushers, Mr. Narimatsu here, coming with your last activity. Well, second to last activity. We're going to do a timeline activity review all this because I know you're going to be a little bit confused, and that's okay. But hopefully that timeline will kind of seal everything together. But here's our last activity of period 8. I apologize for that misspell. There you go. Go ahead and fix that for you. We're going to focus on the last two presidents, Richard Nixon, who gets a very kind of tarnished view in American history as a president that resigned before he was impeached, pretty much admitting his guilt. We're going to talk about that kind of scandal called the Watergate scandal. And then lastly, we're going to end with Jimmy Carter, who will end his presidency in 1980, which is the end of period 8. So that's going to be the end here. We're going to, period 9 is the end of the Cold War and kind of the beginning of continued American superiority, and kind of focus on the war on terror. It's a little bit smaller unit, so we'll talk about that later. But that's what we're going to focus on here and finish up period 8. So let's get into it. Period 8, this activity begins with Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon, you're gonna hear he's known as a very astute politician. As an astute politician, you always have a little feeling of paranoia, right? And you're always concerned about your enemies and your friends, right? So that is definitely what Nixon typifies, a great politician, but in that way, he's also known as a person with a lot of paranoia. One thing that he does is he has all of his conversations are always recorded, right? And he has some issues in the beginning of his presidency in which people of his own government are basically leaking things to the press, saying things that are making him look bad. And so he has a feeling that the people around him, his trusted advisors, can't be trusted either. So, one thing that kind of, if historically you look at a smart man, a career politician with a large sense of paranoia is how a lot of historians would kind of qualify him. He comes in during the Vietnam War after Lyndon B. Johnson, and it is not doing well. It's, we've had multiple massacres. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese are actually going through using trench warfare. Guerrilla warfare techniques. They're also going through other countries like Cambodia and Laos and coming over and basically using other countries to flank us, to go behind us and attack us. It's being advertised on TV. The death counts keeps on increasing. People at home in America continually question why America's in this Southeast Asian country and losing so many of its young boys there. One thing that he comes up is he says, okay, we're going to start ending this war by Vietnamizing things. Inside your guys' activity, I said, how does this relate to conflicts in the Middle East? I really see this how we're doing the conflicts in the Middle East. And the idea is, all right, we're going to train the Afghan forces or the Iraqi security forces, or in this case, the Vietnamese, to protect themselves, right? And that was the goal. It's an ultimate failure. The South Vietnamese government was really, really corrupt, and we were basically in partners with a very corrupt government that even its own people did not trust. And despite the idea of Vietnamization that will just arm and train the South Vietnamese, and this is kind of what the goal of JFK originally was. These advisors were just to advise, but it just became more and more an American thing. They're trying to shift more and more of the responsibility back to the South Vietnamese. So here you can see Nixon, shaking these guys' hands who are trying to do a tank and everything else. And ultimately, this does not be successful, and Saigon ultimately falls. The North Vietnamese run through it. It's kind of a couple of famous pictures that you'll see. One is these streams of people at the U.S. Embassy trying to leave before the communists come, and basically may cause a lot of violence and therefore killing people who supported the other side, right? So you just have all these people literally hanging on to helicopters as they're trying to escort them out on the ships and get out of Saigon, which is the southern capital of South Vietnam, as the communists are coming in from the north. This is another famous one where they're actually physically pushing helicopters off of the bow so that they could have more room to have people here, so that they could escort them back to safety. And a lot of our Vietnamese, a lot of the immigration of Vietnam actually happens during this time. A lot of people that claim Vietnamese descent is a large region is because of this experience. So again, there's some more famous pictures of kind of what was happening during that time, during the fall of Saigon. So ultimately, Nixon would try to basically exit out of Vietnam, like, honorably, an honorable exit. Most historians would qualify this as an American failure. Our goal was to stop Vietnam. You guys saw this in the last video, but just to remind you, we're supposed to help the South Vietnam, stop North Vietnam from coming down and causing communism, and that if one country fell, then the domino theory that another country would fall to communism, the whole world would be communist, and America would be by ourselves, right? We have to contain communism, going back to the Truman Doctrine. Well, the Vietnam War shows that South Vietnam fell, and it did not spread. Communism didn't spread all over the world like wildfire, like a bunch of dominoes falling. Also, we lose a lot of American men and boys, and ultimately, we do not stop communism. So I would qualify it largely as a failure, right? And it is a black eye on American history, especially domestically, right? A lot of individuals at home are blaming troops for these kind of political actions that they're kind of being thrown into, which I think we've begun to recognize the difference of, which I appreciate. Um, Next, another interesting moment that happens during this time, and again, remember that China is not it's not really Russia. China is the one that's really funding the North Vietnamese in South Vietnam. So, despite the fact that China was helping North Vietnam basically attack the South Vietnamese and the Americans, we still meet with them. And there's interesting parts about world politics, especially when you're a world leader. There's these different games that are being played. So one thing that happens is, although China's a communist, and this really kind of is an interesting historical call. It's very similar to President Trump visiting North Korea and Kim Jong Il. Recently, in the most recent years, to try to draft a deal. And Nixon, as a conservative Republican, goes in and tries to, basically opens up a relationship between the United States and China. And, having a president come and shake the hands of a communist leader would be unheard of, 10 years before that. So kind of interesting moment. Another thing that they agreed to is this is under Jimmy Carter, SALT, Jimmy Carter and Nixon, which is strategic arms limitation. So here's Nixon's version and here's Carter's version, but to reduce arms, not have as many ballistic missiles that have nuclear warheads that are out there. So start agreeing to each other how many each other have and reducing them. We actually got out of this. I believe, I don't know who pulled. I think it happened during Obama that Russia pulled out of the SALT treaties. So I don't know if we're going back into a Cold War or what's going on, but that's what they were. And so at this time, we can see tensions between the Soviet Union and communism, and the United States began to reduce. Right, it's starting to slow down, which is nice. Nixon's presidency is ultimately going to be done with the Watergate scandal, and as I kind of spoke to earlier, this guy was super paranoid, and he wanted to go ahead and win re-election. And in this case, he uses a group of people. Basically, he knowingly do this, break into the Democratic National Committee headquarters. So he's a Republican. They break into the Democrats' headquarters and start getting information that he wants to use to hopefully win a re-election. And ultimately, this is kind of found out by these two individuals, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. And these two individuals, Bob Woodward and both actually are still journalists that write amazing books today. But they kind of catch wind of this, and they continually bringing this up, I believe, in the Washington Post. And so ultimately, the public begins hearing about this, Congress begins hearing this, and they are moving towards impeachment. And before they move to impeachment, Nixon calls his resignation. He resigns. And so rather than being impeached, he resigns and he goes down. So the next one is Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter shows up. This is him currently. Getting a little older, but Jimmy Carter lines up, and he's an outsider, similar to our previous President Trump. He's kind of seen outside of politics, and he kind of just does things in his own little corner, not with Congress, and because of that, it kind of frustrates a lot of people. So I kind of wanted to run through this part of your activities just to explain to you, as a fiscal conservative, fiscal means money. So as a guy that doesn't want the government to spend so much money, he's a Democrat, and he alienates him, means he frustrates the Democrats by refusing to spend more money to help the economy or to help social programs. For instance, like Medi-Cal, Medicare. Well, Medi-Cal is a California thing, but Medicare, food stamps, welfare programs. So as a Democrat, he's already frustrating his own party because he's not spending enough money and helping out the poor. He alienated conservatives by pardoning some 10,000 Vietnam War draft evaders. So a bunch of conservatives who kind of supported the Vietnam War and said it was important for us to get there, stop communism. Well, the people who said burned their draft cards and said, I'm not going to go to this war, and that were young kids, he pardons them and lets them not have to face any type of federal liability. So that really frustrates the conservatives. He also gives the Panama Canal back to Panama, which was recently given in, I believe, about 10 or 15 years ago. And he also begins talking to China, who's, again, a communist country, right? And stops building nuclear weapons. So you can see that Jimmy Carter is trying to do his own thing. And because he's trying to do his own thing, he's kind of frustrating his own party. He's already frustrated the other party, and he's not getting the help of Congress. So he's kind of seen as a failed president, and he is actually one of the few presidents in American history who isn't reelected, right? Almost all presidents are nearly reelected in their second term, but he's one of the few that do not. Okay. During his presidency, there's a clash with Iran. If you guys know anything about the history of Iran, is run by a Shah, like a king. It's interesting that we had strong relationships with this king because this king kind of stopped the idea of communism. But ultimately, there's a young, Muslim cleric, Ayatollah Khamenei, and he actually creates. I'll kind of Google this. I need to put this probably up there. Iran Revolution. He kind of creates a revolution to overthrow the Shah or the king, and he rises to power. And he is actually now considered the supreme leader of Iran. He is still there today. And a lot of the president's decisions have to go through him as the Ayatollah supreme leader. But during this revolution, the Iranians capture the embassy and they get these hostages, and they have these hostages, for a long time. And during this time, Jimmy Carter is trying to negotiate to get them back, and it doesn't work. And ultimately, this is another stain on Jimmy Carter's presidency, that first of all, the embassy fell and that there was hostages and he couldn't negotiate the release. So that'll end the 1980s. After this, Ronald Reagan will get reelected, and this kind of conservative upheaval is going to happen. This kind of tax revolt, this kind of Republican strong ascendance to authority, which has kind of gone back and forth for the last about 20 or 30 years now. That's kind of the beginning of period 9. So congratulations. You made it through period 8, a very extensive and long period. It's more like world history than it is American history. And I know, again, some of the events might be a little bit mushy in your head, but we're going to do a little bit of a timeline activity, show you another resource that might help you with all periods, actually, especially those students that kind of think in a linear way rather than this, like, go there and rewind, go there and rewind, go there and rewind. When I'm talking about foreign policy and civil rights movements and all these different presidents. So hopefully this next activity will help you out. All right, guys. We'll see you on the next one. All right. Take care. Bye.